How did the Mongols conquer China? The greatest military campaign in history. Picture this: a civilization that had stood for over 3,000 years, protected by the greatest wall ever built, commanding armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands, and possessing technology centuries ahead of its time. Now imagine a band of nomadic horsemen from the steppes, outnumbered, technologically inferior, and dismissed as barbarians, bringing this empire to its knees. This wasn't supposed to be possible. Yet between 1205 and 1279, the Mongols accomplished what seemed utterly impossible. They conquered China. But here's what makes this story truly mind-bending. The Mongols didn't just win. They rewrote the rules of warfare itself, and in doing so changed the course of world history forever. The impossible enemy. Let's be clear about the magnitude of this achievement. China in the 13th century wasn't some declining power waiting to be toppled. The Song dynasty controlled a population exceeding 100 million people, roughly half the world's urban population at the time. They had gunpowder weapons, flamethrowers, and sophisticated naval fleets. Their cities were protected by walls that made medieval European fortifications look like sandcastles. Their standing armies dwarfed anything in Europe. The Mongols, they had horses, bows, and an uncanny ability to survive on almost nothing. By every conventional military calculation, they should have been slaughtered at the gates. So how did they do it? The answer reveals one of history's greatest lessons. Innovation beats tradition, and adaptability conquers strength. Genghis Khan's calculated gambit. When Genghis Khan first turned his eyes toward China in 1205, he faced not one, but 3 Chinese states. The Western Xia in the northwest, the Jin dynasty in the north, and the mighty Song dynasty in the south. Rather than charging headlong into this hornet's nest, Genghis displayed the strategic patience that would define the entire Mongol conquest. He started with the Western Xia, the weakest link. But here's the twist. He didn't actually want to conquer them, not at first. He was testing his armies, testing Chinese defenses, learning how to crack the code of siege warfare that had protected China for millennia. And learn he did. The Mongols discovered something revolutionary. They didn't need to be better at everything. They just needed to be better at learning from everyone else. The technology heist. Here's where the story gets deliciously ironic. The Chinese had gunpowder, they had siege engines, they had the best military engineers in the world. And the Mongols? They simply took them. After each battle, Mongol commanders didn't just loot gold and silk. They kidnapped engineers, craftsmen, and weapons specialists. Chinese siege experts found themselves conscripted into the Mongol war machine, teaching their captors how to build trebuchets, catapults, and even early gunpowder weapons. It was the greatest hostile takeover of intellectual property in military history. The Mongols transformed themselves from steppe warriors into a hybrid force that combined cavalry mobility with cutting-edge siege technology. They became the perfect predator, fast enough to outmaneuver Chinese armies in the field, and now equipped to crack open their fortress cities. The fall of the Jin, a masterclass in psychological warfare. By 1211, Genghis Khan was ready for the Jin dynasty. What followed was a campaign that would make Machiavelli weep with admiration. The Mongols didn't just fight battles, they weaponized terror. They perfected a brutal calculus. Cities that surrendered immediately were spared. Cities that resisted, their populations were massacred, and survivors were sent ahead to the next city to spread tales of horror. It was psychological warfare on an industrial scale. But here's the truly brilliant part. Often the Mongols didn't even need to carry out these threats. The mere reputation was enough. Cities began surrendering at the sight of Mongol banners on the horizon. By 1234, the Jin dynasty had collapsed. The Mongols controlled northern China, but the hardest challenge still lay ahead. The Song dynasty in the south, protected by rivers, mountains, and the most formidable defenses the world had ever seen. Mongol and Kublai, the perfect storm. After Genghis Khan's death, his grandson Mongol Khan took up the mantle in 1251, assigning another grandson, Kublai Khan, to finish what Genghis had started. What happened next was a 45-year campaign that redefined the limits of human endurance and military persistence. The Song dynasty wasn't going down without the fight of the millennium. They had everything: vast wealth, massive armies, powerful navy, and geography that seemed designed by the gods to repel invasion. The Yangtze River alone was a defensive barrier that had stopped northern invaders for centuries. But Kublai Khan had learned the ultimate Mongol lesson: when you can't go through something, go around it. When you can't beat them at their own game, change the game entirely. The naval revolution nobody saw coming. Here's a fact that breaks most people's understanding of the Mongols. They built a navy. Yes, the horse-riding, steppe-dwelling Mongols, people who had spent their entire existence on land, constructed one of the largest naval fleets in medieval history. They hired Chinese shipbuilders, Korean sailors, and anyone else who knew which end of a boat went forward. The Song dynasty's naval superiority? Neutralized. Their river defenses? Outflanked. Their impregnable position? Suddenly very pregnable. In 1273, the Mongols besieged Xiangyang, a fortress city that controlled access to the Song heartland. The siege lasted 5 years. 5 years. Any other conqueror in history would have given up. The Mongols built Muslim-designed counterweight trebuchets that could hurl projectiles weighing up to 150 kilograms. They slowly, methodically, impossibly broke the unbreakable. The final act. When pride meets persistence. By 1276, Mongol armies stood at the gates of Hangzhou, the Song capital, and quite possibly the most magnificent city on earth at the time, home to over 1 million people with gardens, palaces, and wealth that made Venice look provincial. The child emperor Gong of Song surrendered, but even then, Song loyalists refused to accept defeat. They fled south with another child emperor, determined to fight to the last breath. The final battle came in 1279 at Yamen, a naval engagement where the last Song fleet made its desperate stand. When defeat became inevitable, the Song chancellor jumped into the sea with the 8-year-old Emperor Bing in his arms. They drowned together, choosing death over submission. China had fallen. After 74 years of warfare, the impossible had become reality. The aftermath. What it all meant. The Mongol conquest of China stands as perhaps the most significant military achievement in human history, not because of its brutality, but because of what it represented. A nomadic people, through sheer adaptability, learning capacity, and strategic persistence, had conquered the most advanced civilization on Earth. Kublai Khan established the Yuan dynasty, and under Mongol rule, China became part of the largest contiguous empire the world has ever seen. The Silk Road flourished. Ideas, technologies, and cultures flowed between East and West in unprecedented ways. The Mongols, those barbarians from the steppes, became the conduit through which Chinese innovations, printing, gunpowder, compass technology, flowed to Europe, setting the stage for the Renaissance. The conquest taught the world an enduring lesson. Walls, no matter how great, cannot stop ideas. Technology, no matter how advanced, cannot overcome adaptability. And tradition, no matter how ancient, must evolve or die. The Mongols conquered China not despite being outsiders, but because of it. They had no investment in the way things had always been done. They were free to innovate, to steal, to learn, and to become whatever they needed to be to win. And that, ultimately, is how the impossible became inevitable.